Hey everybody, it's Michael from Wahoo Comics here with another haul and speculation video, as well as another story of personal redemption that's centered around this book, Iron Man 282. So when I first started collecting comics as a kid, Marvel was running a storyline throughout all of its titles called Acts of Vengeance. And I loved that storyline as a kid because it mostly just involved a bunch of superhero battles, which I thought were really cool. And some of my favorite books from that storyline were the Iron Man books. There's one where he fought the Wrecker, and in the next issue he fought a villain called Chemistro. And I just thought those battles were really fun and really cool. And so I decided that Iron Man would be one of the books that I started collecting every month. And so I started to do that. But unfortunately, the tone and the focus of the book quickly shifted from being these big, fun superhero battles to dealing more with the technological aspect of Iron Man, and became much more science fiction-y. And now I know that that's just part of the Iron Man mythos. But back then, it just went over my head and was really boring, and so I didn't really enjoy the title. But even back then, like many of us collectors, I had some obsessive compulsive tendencies. And so once I started collecting a title, I couldn't stop. I just had to get it month after month, whether or not I was enjoying it. And finally, after literally a couple of years of not enjoying Iron Man, I finally worked up what to me was the courage to stop collecting a title for the first time. And I said, I'm not going to get any more Iron Man books. And so the final book I got in like almost a 3-year run was Iron Man 280. Fast forward several years, I took a hiatus in collecting, came back to the hobby, and then found out, well, number 281 was the first cameo appearance of the War Machine armor. And then 282 was even a bigger deal. It's the first full appearance of the War Machine armor, and of course this iconic cover. And so I was digging through my collection, seeing what I had gotten as a kid. It's counting through my Iron Man 275, 76. I started like at 251 or something like that. And 278, 279, I'm like, oh yes, I'm gonna have the first appearance of the War Machine armor. 280, and then a big gap. And I was devastated. And for years, I have been upset that I did not have this issue when I was so close to having it. And so I've been looking for a good deal on it for a while, and I finally found what I thought was one, and so I bought it, and I am so happy to now have this as a part of my collection. But what's funny in that story, so I missed 281, 282, 283, but I actually did buy this issue, issue 284, because of the cover. It says The Death of Anthony Stark. And so back then as a kid, I realized, especially back then, issues where someone died had value to it. And so I saw, oh my goodness, Anthony Stark died. This issue is going to be crazy valuable. And so I picked it up. And so when I was looking through my collection, I saw 279, 280, and then a gap until 284. And this issue for years has been worth nothing, especially compared to the 282 and 281. It's just been a bargain bin issue. And so I've been frustrated that that's the one I had. But recently, this issue has started to pick up a little bit of steam, and I think is actually a really undervalued issue now, not because of the death of Anthony Stark, but because this is the first comic where Rhodey puts on the War Machine armor, because obviously Tony Stark's dead. And as we probably all know, Rhodey is the War Machine character now, and is so in the MCU. And as you may know, I've talked about before, Disney Plus is coming out with an Armor War series. And so I think all the keys around War Machine are good ones to be picking up now. And so I think this is a really undervalued one. And if you can find it for a couple of bucks, I think it's worth certainly picking up. So this is actually my third copy of this. The one I got as a kid. I got another copy a couple months ago, and now I'm happy to add another one. And then speaking of Armor Wars, one more Iron Man book I picked up from the same seller was Iron Man 225, which is the first issue in the Armor Wars storyline. And so I'm slowly but surely trying to get all the books from that storyline. This is the most valuable one since it's the first in it, and I didn't have it, and so now I'm glad to have it for myself and my PC. All right, well, the seller I bought these from is actually selling off his whole collection, and so I actually bought quite a few books from him, too many to share just in this one video. So I'm going to be sharing some of the books throughout the coming videos that I got from this seller, but I will show off 3 more in this video that I got from him, including this one, Return of the Jedi #1. Something I think that's really undervalued are a lot of these movie adaptations of the Star Wars movies, because these often contain the first appearances of important characters in Star Wars. So Return of the Jedi #1 contains the first appearance of Jabba the Hutt. #2 contains the first appearance of Emperor Palpatine. And #3 contains the first appearance of Admiral Akbar and Mon Mothma. And Mon Mothma has actually been confirmed to be in the upcoming Andor Disney Plus series. And so she might be a character that people start to get more interest in, especially if that character becomes a big deal in that show. So keep your eyes out for these movie adaptations. But something interesting, and this will bring me into books from the next seller, something interesting before Return of the Jedi with A New Hope and Empire Strike Back, those movies, Marvel didn't adapt them into a special limited series, but they actually put them in the main Star Wars series. And so I've got some books from both of those movies, including a pretty big one, Star Wars #1. This is my second copy of this book. And issues 1 through 6 of Star Wars it's just A New Hope. It's just an adaptation of it. It's not an original story. And this book, as you may know, contains the first appearance of a lot of characters: Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, C-3PO, R2-D2, Grand Moff Tarkin, and it's not a cheap book, but I still think it's super undervalued. I think Star Wars is going to be, as long as comics and people care about that, I think people will care about Star Wars. And so if you can ever find a copy of this at anywhere of a decent price, I think it's as safe as anything can be when it comes to comics in terms of an investment. So I'm really happy to have my second copy of this. It's actually the same seller I got my first copy from, and he has 2 more that I'm planning to pick up, and so super excited about that. And I also got from him my first copy of Star Wars #2, and this contains the first appearance of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Han Solo, and Chewbacca. So another great book to pick up, and this one might actually be more undervalued than the first one, because obviously those are iconic characters, and I don't think this book gets nearly as much attention as it deserves. And I also got from the same seller Star Wars #3, which isn't as significant as the first 2, but I would eventually like to have this whole run, and so I got a good price on this one, so I picked that one up as well. And then from another seller, I picked up some books from the Empire Strikes Back adaptation, which was also in the Star Wars main title. And that adaptation began in issue 39 and it ends in 40 something. I'm not sure, but probably like 45, something like that. But this is number 40. This contains the first appearance of the Rogue Squadron. 41, which contains the first appearance of Yoda. Unfortunately, no 42. That's a book that's on my bucket list that I don't have my own copy of, that I want at some point. Of course, that contains the first appearance, as you may know, of Boba Fett. And man, other than Star Wars #1, I think it's probably the most valuable issue in this series. So bummed. I still need a copy of that. But I did also get from this seller Star Wars 43. I've got a few copies of this, and this is the first appearance of Lando. So another great book to be picking up. And one more book I picked up from this seller wasn't a Star Wars book, but it was my third copy of Thor 337, which contains the first appearance of Beta Ray Bill. And so right now, anytime I can find a good deal on this book, I am picking it up. If you've been watching kind of what's going on in comics and the MCU recently, you might have seen last week there was an official announcement that Adam Warlock is going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And his key books have been on the rise in value for a while now. But when that news hit, they spiked. And now I think if you're trying to sell them, are probably the time to look to move them somewhere between now and the movie. But I expect the same thing to happen to Beta Ray Bill. I think he'll be in the movies sometime in the next few years, sooner rather than later, I hope. It's a good chance he could be in Thor 4, I think, but, and I don't know. But he's a popular character that will be around at some point. And so I am planning to buy as many copies of these as I can right now. And then whenever he's officially announced or a trailer releases, and that might, if you have an Adam Warlock key, maybe you wait till the trailer releases. But before the movie, if you're looking to sell, you probably should sell. And then I'm going to find which of my Beta Ray Bill Thor 337s looks the nicest, and I'm going to keep that one, and then hopefully sell the others. And then I try it. That's kind of my strategy, to buy multiple copies of books, keep the highest graded one, try to sell some of the others eventually when I think they're at a high point to help fund the hobby. My hope in comic collecting is to basically break even with money, but then obviously to be able to hold on to some comics for a long time that are cool and of course worth something. All right, well, that brings me to my sleeper of the week, and going back to Star Wars movie adaptations. This is Star Wars The Force Awakens, and I have picked 2 copies of this book up from my LCS for a couple of bucks. And this contains the first appearances of Kylo Ren, Rey, Finn, General Hux, and Captain Phasma. And so, of course, those are popular characters. I think Kylo Ren especially is going to be a character in the comic books that's here to stay. I think they're going to continue to develop him, I hope, at least in the comics. And maybe that's just my personal bias. I really like his character. But I think this is one that will rise in value at some point, and so I think you can probably get it for a couple of bucks, and it's worth buying at that point, I think. All right, well, before we sign off, the question of the week. So we've been talking a lot about Star Wars. I am curious, what do you think is the most underrated Star Wars movie? I think a lot of people, if you did your favorite, most people would probably pick episode 4 or 5. So I want to do something a little more interesting. So what is most underrated? I'm going to go with episode 6, Return of the Jedi. I think it gets a lot more hate than it deserves because people kind of tend not to like the Ewoks, I think. But I love the beginning of the movie, the Sarlacc pit, the fight over that. As a kid, I just remember thinking that was awesome and cool. And then as an adult, I really loved the end of the movie when Darth Vader, of course, betrays the Emperor to protect his son, Luke Skywalker. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm always a sucker for father-son stories since I am a father and have some sons. And, that really just gets me right here. And so when Vader, he's wrestling back and forth, who do I follow? And then he gives his life for his son. Man, it still gets me. And so that's my most underrated Star Wars movie. I think it needs a lot more respect than it gets. But what is yours? Let me know down in the comments, or you can comment on anything else, books, characters that you think we should be picking up and looking to invest in. Of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would appreciate if you do that. It would help me out and the channel out. Still trying, getting closer and closer each week to 100 subs, and hope to be there soon. And so hopefully you can be a part of that if you're not already subscribed. And of course, liking the video, things like that are of course a big help too. So like always, really enjoyed it and look forward to the next one and hope you enjoyed it too.